The frosted glass door of the penthouse study didn't just swing open. It hit the interior wall with a crack that echoed through the entire 42nd floor like a gunshot, and Petra Voss, housekeeper, had exactly 3 seconds to realize she was no longer alone. She spun from the window, knocking over the small brass lamp on the reading table. It clattered to the marble floor and lay there, still glowing, throwing a crooked shaft of light across the dark room. Her hands flew up instinctively, pressing the damp cloth she'd been using against the welt rising along her left cheekbone. Standing in the doorway, still wearing his overcoat, dark charcoal wool, dusted with the first snow of a Toronto November, was Dominic Caruso. He did not turn on the overhead light. He did not announce himself. He simply stood there, reading the room the way a man reads a map in enemy territory. Quickly, clinically, without emotion. His eyes moved from the toppled lamp, to the cloth pressed to her face, to the thin line of her pressed lips, to the way she had flattened herself against the window, as though she was calculating whether 42 floors of glass and November air might be preferable to answering whatever question he was about to ask. He crossed the room in 4 steps, closed the door behind him without looking at it, and stopped at the edge of the reading table. "Take that away from your face," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of quiet that was not peace. It was the quiet before something irreversible. Not a request. Slowly, she lowered the cloth. The welt was worse than she'd thought. She knew that by the way his jaw set, not in disgust, but in the particular terrible stillness of a man who has just decided something. "Who did that to you?" Petra Voss had not planned to spend her 29th year of life cleaning someone else's penthouse at midnight in a city that wasn't even hers. 18 months ago, she had been a registered practical nurse at Ottawa General, working the overnight trauma rotation, living in a 2-bedroom flat in Centretown with her younger brother, Liam, and a cat neither of them had technically agreed to adopt. It was a small life, a careful life, the kind of life you build in deliberate increments when you've learned, early and hard, that things collapse fast when you stop paying attention. Their father, Howard Voss, had taught her that. Not intentionally, Howard Voss had taught her most things without meaning to. He was not a cruel man. He was the other kind of dangerous. Charming, impulsive, perpetually convinced that the next bet would be the one that changed everything. He had owed money to various people for as long as Petra could remember. But the debt he ran up 18 months ago was of a different species entirely. $320,000. To the Marchetti lending network, a quiet, vicious operation that moved through Toronto's financial underbelly like groundwater through limestone. They didn't send notices. They didn't call. They simply appeared one evening outside the building where Liam was enrolled in his 2nd year of engineering at the University of Toronto. And they let Howard know, through channels Petra didn't fully understand and didn't want to, that payment plans were not on offer. Liam was 22. He had a scholarship he'd worked 4 years to earn and a professor who said he had the sharpest structural mind she'd seen in a decade. He did not deserve to be a bargaining chip. So Petra had made a deal, or rather, a deal had been made for her, through a private placement agency that operated in the margins between the legal and the very much not. The agency arranged specialized domestic positions for individuals in financial distress. The salaries were exceptional, the environments were not. She was placed with the Caruso household. The Caruso name was known in Toronto the way black ice is known in February. You didn't always see it, but everyone knew what happened when you hit it wrong. Dominic Augusto Caruso, 56, was the chairman of Caruso Capital Partners, a real estate and private equity firm with holdings across the country. That was the public version. The other version, the one that moved through certain circles in whispers, was that Caruso Capital was the very respectable surface of an operation that had controlled significant portions of Toronto's construction contracts, union negotiations, and cash economy for the better part of 2 decades. Dominic Caruso himself was not what she had expected. She had expected someone louder, someone who wore his power visibly, like a watch chosen to be noticed. Instead, he was precise, contained. He spoke rarely, and when he did, people stopped whatever they were doing. He was not a tall man, but he occupied space differently than most people, as though the room had arranged itself around him rather than the other way around. She had been a ghost in his household for 11 months. That was the instruction, delivered by the head of domestic staff, a composed woman named Mrs. Alderman, on Petra's first morning. "You will not be seen. You will not be heard. You will anticipate needs before they become requests. You will address Mr. Caruso as Sir or Mr. Caruso if directly spoken to, which will be rarely. Any personal information about the household that reaches the outside world will be traced back to its source." Are we clear? They were clear. Petra had followed the rule without difficulty. She was good at making herself small. She'd had plenty of practice. The trouble began on a Thursday in late November, 6 weeks before the night Dominic Caruso walked into his own study and found her pressed against the window with a bruise rising on her face. The Marchetti network had a man named Victor Price. Victor Price was not the top of anything. He was the kind of man organizations like Marchetti kept specifically because he enjoyed the parts of the work that more senior people preferred to delegate. He had started calling Petra's mobile 3 weeks earlier, informing her that the collection schedule had been accelerated. The arrangement, 70% of her salary transferred every second Friday to an account in Liam's name that the Marchettis controlled, was no longer sufficient. They wanted the principal, or a lump sum against it, within 60 days. 60 days. $320,000, minus the roughly $40,000 she'd already redirected over 11 months. She didn't have it. She would not have it. There was no version of the next 60 days in which she had it. She had told Victor Price this, quietly and carefully, on the phone that Thursday. Victor Price had shown up at the Caruso building 2 nights later. He had found her at the service entrance on the underground level, where she'd gone to receive a grocery delivery. She didn't know how he'd gotten past the parking structure gate. She found out later, though she didn't know it yet, that he hadn't done it alone. Charlie's girl, he said, which was what the Marchettis called her, a corruption of her father's name she'd never been able to make stop. You're light. Mr. Marchetti doesn't like waiting. I told you I need more time. You've had time. He stepped closer. You know what, I think you've been comfortable up here. I think you forgot what you're actually here for. She tried to move past him. His hand caught her arm, and then the back of his hand caught her face, and she hit the brick pillar beside the service door hard enough that her vision went white for 3 full seconds. He was gone by the time she could see straight. She stood in the underground air, her cheek radiating heat, and she thought with a horrible clarity, I cannot report this. If she reported it, questions would be asked. If questions were asked, her arrangement with the Marchettis would surface. In the world she now inhabited, a compromised domestic employee was a liability, and liabilities in the Caruso household were not given severance packages. She had let herself into the building through the service entrance, taken the staff elevator to the 42nd floor, and gone to the one room she knew would be empty. Dominic Caruso's private study, where he worked late, but had a board dinner that evening and wouldn't return until well after midnight. She simply needed somewhere quiet, somewhere with a window that looked out over the city, with all its ordinary lit-up life going on below, to remind herself that she was still in it. She hadn't counted on the board dinner ending early. Who did that to you? Dominic Caruso asked again. He hadn't moved from the edge of the reading table. He wasn't looming, he wasn't crowding her, but there was something in the quality of his stillness that made the room feel smaller. I walked into the pillar at the service entrance, Petra said. It was dark. I wasn't paying attention. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man who has been lied to many times and has become very good at identifying it. The service entrance, Dominic said, is lit by 4 overhead fluorescent panels that are on a motion sensor. They activate the moment the exterior door opens. He tilted his head, just slightly. Try again. Petra's grip on the cloth tightened. Mr. Caruso. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. I appreciate your concern. It was a minor incident. It won't affect my work. I'm not asking about your work. He crossed his arms. I'm asking you a direct question for the 3rd time. I would like a direct answer. Something in the way he said it, not threatening, not impatient, just so completely and terrifyingly certain that she would answer, cracked something loose in her chest. His name is Victor Price, she said. The words came out before she had fully decided to let them. He's an enforcer for a lending network. My father owes them money. I've been paying against the debt from my salary. He came tonight to tell me I was behind. Dominic didn't blink. How much does your father owe? $320,000. And your arrangement, you've been sending them money from this household. It was not accusation. It was documentation. Still, Petra's stomach dropped. 70% of my wages, every second Friday. She met his eyes because she had decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that if this was the end of it, she would at least end it looking at him directly. I know what this means. By your rules, I've brought external exposure into your home. I understand if you need to. Stop. His voice cut across hers without raising. Who else knows you're here? Who else knows you work for this household? The agency placed me. The Marchettis know I have a high-earning domestic position. They don't know specifically where. I was told confidentiality was mandatory. She paused, but Victor found the service entrance. He walked in through the parking structure. He either followed me, or someone told him how. The temperature in the room seemed to change. Dominic uncrossed his arms. He turned and walked to the corner cabinet, opened the lower panel, and removed a small first aid kit. the kind that was very well stocked in a way that suggested it had been used for things beyond paper cuts. He walked back and set it on the reading table beside her. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He crouched in front of her, which she thought distantly was the last thing she'd expected, and opened the kit with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was. He tore open an antiseptic wipe. "This is going to sting," he said. "Not an apology, just information." It did sting. She kept her eyes on the wall behind him. "Your brother," Dominic said quietly, pressing a folded gauze pad against the swelling. "He's at U of T." Petra's breath stopped. "How do you know about Liam?" "The agency provides full background on all placements." His voice was matter-of-fact, focused on what he was doing. "Engineering, second year, top 12% of his cohort." He looked up at her briefly. "The Marchettis have been using him as security. His safety in exchange for your compliance." "Yes." Dominic sat back on his heels, looking at her face, not at the bruise now, but at her expression. Whatever he saw there made something in his own expression shift, almost imperceptibly, like the surface tension of water just before it changes state. "Victor Price didn't walk through my parking structure alone," he said. "That level requires a rolling access code that resets every 8 hours. He had help." The words landed in the room and sat there. "Someone on your staff," Petra said slowly. "Someone who was paid very well and made a very significant mistake." He stood, turning toward the window. Below, the lights of Toronto spread to the horizon, the Gardner, the lake, the vast, patient grid of the city. "How long has Price been calling you? And in 3 weeks, not once did you come to me." She looked at him. "You're my employer, not my—" She stopped. "Not your what?" He turned from the window. There was nothing unkind in his face. "Not your protector. No, I'm not." His voice dropped, not to softness exactly, but to something beneath the official register he usually occupied. "But Victor Price put his hands on someone living under my roof, Petra. And that is not a distinction I make lightly." He said her first name as though he'd been deciding whether to use it for some time. "Nothing that happens to you on my property is only your problem. Do you understand that?" She didn't, quite, but she nodded. He picked up his phone from the inside pocket of his coat and placed a call. 3 words. "Wake up Harlan." He ended the call, looked at her and said, "Stay in this room." He left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the quiet that descended was the kind that presses against your ears. 15 minutes later, Petra heard, muffled through the heavy door, the unmistakable flat sound of a consequence being delivered. She pressed her knees together and stared at the fallen lamp still lying on its side on the floor. And she thought about all the ways tonight could end and how few of them she had any control over. The door opened again. Dominic stepped inside. He had removed his coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows in a way that was entirely businesslike. He went directly to the sideboard, poured 2 fingers of something amber into a glass, and looked at the lamp on the floor. Without a word, he righted it. "The individual who provided Price with the access code has been removed from the property," he said. "My security director is sweeping the building. We'll have a full picture by morning." He picked up his glass, didn't drink from it yet. "Your brother is going to be moved tonight. There's a private residence in the annex. Belongs to a colleague, currently empty. Liam will be there by 2 a.m. with 2 of my people on the door. The Marchettis will not find him." Petra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Why?" she asked. "You don't owe us anything. My father's mistakes aren't. Victor Price came onto my property," Dominic said, setting his glass down untouched, and he put his hand across the face of a woman I employ. "In my world, that is not an accounting error. That is a statement." He looked at her steadily, and statements require responses. "You're going to start a war over a bruise on a housekeeper's face. I'm going to finish one that should never have been permitted to begin." He sat down, finally, in the chair across from her, not behind the desk, just across the reading table, as though they were 2 people who knew each other well enough to occupy the same room in the middle of the night without needing titles between them. The Marchetti network has been encroaching on interests in this city for 4 years. I have been patient because I prefer patience. They seem to have interpreted that as permission. He glanced at the door. They've just lost that interpretation. Petra let out a breath that she felt had been building for 11 months. "My father," she said quietly. "He's in Ottawa. He doesn't know any of this. He'll continue not knowing. That's easier for everyone." Dominic looked at her. "Your debt to the Marchettis, whatever remains of it. It's done. It doesn't exist after tonight." She stared at him. "Mr. Caruso, Dominic." He said it without emphasis, as though it were simply the correct word for the situation. "That's $320,000 that my father is a problem that Victor Price made mine when he walked through my garage." His voice was even. "Final. Sleep here tonight. Mrs. Alderman will have a room prepared in the East Wing. Tomorrow we'll discuss the rest." She should have asked what the rest meant. She didn't, because her throat was too tight and the lamp was back upright, and Liam was going to be safe tonight, and those three things together were more than she had dared let herself want for 11 months. By the time Dominic Caruso stepped into the corridor to deal with the next 12 hours, the estate was already different. It had the compressed, focused energy of a place preparing for something deliberate and conclusive. Two men she'd never seen before stood at the elevator. A woman she recognized as a senior figure in the building's security apparatus was moving through the residence with a tablet, checking panels, noting things, her expression professionally empty. In the East Wing guest room, cream walls, a view of Lake Ontario, sheets that were nothing like the serviceable cotton in the staff quarters. Petra lay awake on top of the duvet, with her shoes still on, listening to the building rearrange itself around a decision that had already been made. Her phone buzzed at 1:47 a.m. It was a message from an unknown number, consisting of an address in the annex and a single follow-up text. "He's in. Doors locked. Go to sleep." She put the phone face down on the nightstand. For the first time in 11 months, the pressure in her chest, the constant low-frequency dread of it, went quiet. She slept. By morning, three things had happened. The first, the individual removed from the property the previous night had been identified as a scheduling coordinator named Alderman, no relation to Mrs. Alderman, which Dominic's people noted with the particular flat humor of professionals, who had been on the Marchetti payroll for 7 months, feeding movement schedules and access codes in exchange for the forgiveness of a personal gambling debt. The irony, Petra thought when she heard it, was nearly too much. The second, Dominic's financial investigator had spent the night reconstructing what the Marchetti network had been doing in the city. The results, delivered over breakfast in the solarium, all glass and white oak and the grey lake beyond, were laid out across a low table in a series of clean, spare without expression, and then set aside with the finality of a man who has confirmed what he already knew. The third, Petra, dressed in clothes left outside her door that were not staff uniform, was asked to sit at the solarium table. She sat. Dominic's second-in-command, a contained, intelligent man named Fletcher, who she'd seen twice in 11 months and never heard speak above a low murmur, was already there. "You don't need to be here for this," Fletcher said, not dismissively, but as genuine information. "She stays," Dominic said, not looking up from the page he was reading. Fletcher's eyes moved to Petra briefly, then back to his employer. He said nothing further. Dominic turned the last page over, face down. He looked out at the lake. "Raymond Marchetti has been lending money against properties he doesn't own, through companies that don't exist, to people who are too afraid or too embarrassed to go to the police," he said. He was talking to Fletcher, but Petra understood she was meant to hear it. He is not, when you strip away the mystique, a complex man. He is a man who has been exploiting the silence of frightened people for a very long time, and who has mistaken that silence for an absence of consequences. He paused. "It ends this week." Fletcher nodded once. The network runs through 4 operational hubs: the lending office in Liberty Village, the property management company in Etobicoke, the sports bar chain on the Danforth that processes the cash, and the debt registry, server farm, leased space in a data center in Mississauga. 4 targets, Dominic said. Liberty Village goes to our legal team. We have 2 judges who will move on it. Etobicoke, I want the company records seized by the end of business. The Danforth, cut the cash flow. I want every vendor and supplier they rely on contacted and offered better terms. The registry is the priority. He looked at Fletcher directly. Every dollar owed to Raymond Marchetti by working people in this city disappears. The server gets wiped. If the data center manager needs compensation for the inconvenience, compensate him. Petra looked at the grey lake. She was thinking about Liam, safe in a house in the annex, probably awake and confused and eating whatever Fletcher's people had left in the refrigerator. She was thinking about her father in Ottawa, still certain that some next thing was going to fix everything. "You're doing this legally," she said. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. Dominic looked at her. "Largely. And if Raymond Marchetti pushes back..." "Raymond Marchetti," Dominic said, "is going to spend the next 72 hours discovering that the city has reorganized itself against him in ways he did not anticipate and cannot quickly reverse. He may push back. If he does, he will do so in a landscape that no longer favors him." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "I have been patient with Raymond for 4 years. He should have taken better care of that patience." Fletcher stood. "I'll have the legal team in by 9. One more thing?" Dominic held up one finger. Fletcher stopped. "Find Victor Price." Fletcher left. The solarium was quiet, just the sound of the lake against the building far below and the radiating warmth of the floor-to-ceiling glass. "Victor Price," Petra said. "Will not be charged with anything," Dominic said, with the careful precision of someone choosing words for their exact meaning. "I can't promise you what will happen to him. I can promise you it will not happen anywhere near you or your brother." She looked at him across the white oak table. In the morning light, he looked older than he had in the study last night. Not tired, but marked, the way certain materials show their quality only in direct light. There were old scars on his right forearm, half visible beneath his rolled sleeve. She had cleaned this room many times without ever looking at him closely enough to notice them. "Mr. Caruso," she stopped. "Dominic," he said again, still without emphasis. Dominic. The name felt strange and important in her mouth. "I need you to understand something. I didn't come to work here to maneuver into something like this. I came because my options were limited and the salary was exceptional. I wasn't trying to. Petra." He said her name the way you stop a sentence that doesn't need to finish. "I know why you came here. I know your file better than you'd probably like. I know you completed 2 years of your RPN before Ottawa General's overnight rotation, and that you deferred your practical placement to move to Toronto when your father's situation deteriorated, and that you have been sending money out of this household every second Friday for 11 months without once asking for anything in return." He was quiet for a moment. "I am not doing this because you maneuvered anything. I am doing it because what has been happening to you is unjust and it occurred within the boundaries of my home, and I have never been comfortable with injustice occurring inside things I am responsible for." She didn't answer right away. Outside, the first pale December sun was finally burning through the cloud cover over the lake. "What happens now?" she asked. "After this week, that depends," he said, "on what you want." 3 days later, Dominic Caruso walked into a private meeting room at a downtown hotel with Fletcher on his left, Petra's employment folder under his arm, and the knowledge, delivered by his financial team that morning, that Raymond Marchetti's Liberty Village office had been injuncted, his Etobicoke property company was under receivership review, and the Danforth cash operation had lost 17 of its 22 supplier contracts in 48 hours. Raymond Marchetti was already in the room. He was a wide, red-faced man who had spent 30 years being the most powerful person in every conversation. He had the look of someone who had not recently been in a conversation where that was true. "You've gone too far, Caruso," Raymond said, before Dominic had fully taken his seat. "I've been quite measured, actually," Dominic said pleasantly. "I could have done all of this 6 months ago. You pulled the infrastructure out from under half my book. You've got judges, you've got landlords, you've got my vendors calling me to cancel contracts they've held for years. I asked them if they'd prefer to work with someone more reliable," Dominic said. Most of them said yes. Raymond leaned forward. "I've got 60 families who owe me money. I've got debtors across this city." Had. Raymond stopped. "The server in Mississauga had a catastrophic technical failure yesterday evening," Dominic said, folding his hands on the table. "The redundant backup appears to have failed simultaneously, a very unfortunate coincidence. Your debt registry no longer exists." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man watching something he built over 30 years become a historical artifact. "This is over a girl," Raymond said at last, his voice dropping into disbelief. "This is over one woman. This is over my city," Dominic said. The pleasantness was gone from his voice. What remained was simply fact, direct, heavy, unarguable, as load-bearing concrete. "You have been operating in it as though it had no management. I have corrected that impression. The girl, as you call her, is employed by my household. What happens to her happens under my watch. That is not a distinction I made in this room tonight. I made it 3 days ago, and everything since has been consistent with it." He stood up. "I would recommend using the next 6 months to transition your remaining legitimate holdings into something that doesn't require the cooperation of frightened people to function." He picked up the folder. "If I find that cooperation being sought again, I won't involve lawyers." Fletcher held the door. Dominic walked out. In the elevator, Fletcher said nothing. Dominic said nothing. The numbers descended in silence. She found the fault in the access log herself, Dominic said when the lobby doors opened. Fletcher glanced at him. 3 weeks before Price showed up, Dominic continued as they walked toward the car. She noticed a discrepancy in the scheduling logs. She didn't know what it was, but she wrote it down. "It's in the report from the security sweep." He stopped at the door of the car. She documented a security anomaly in a household that had given her every reason to keep her head down and ask nothing, because she is the kind of person who notices things and writes them down even when it costs her nothing to ignore them. Fletcher said, "What are you going to do about that?" Dominic got in the car. She was in the solarium when he came back, sitting in the same chair she'd occupied 3 days ago, a mug of tea in both hands, watching the December lake go dark. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She had, she realized, learned the specific rhythm of his footsteps over 11 months without ever consciously cataloguing them. And she straightened slightly. He came in, sat down across from her and said, "It's done." Petra looked at him. "The registry is gone. Your father's debt is erased. Liam can go back to his building tomorrow." She put the mug down. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "Raymond Marchetti will be occupied with a series of legal and financial inconveniences for the foreseeable future." He leaned back, looking at her directly in the unhurried way he had. "He won't be sending anyone else." The quiet settled between them, not uncomfortable. Outside, the lights of the city were coming on across the water. The slow accumulation of lit windows that meant people going home, putting children to bed, living the ordinary Wednesday evening that Petra had almost forgotten existed. "I found something in the scheduling log," she said. 3 weeks ago. I wrote it down. I didn't know what it was." "I know," he said. "My security director found your note in the sweep." She looked at him. "You didn't tell me that. I didn't want you to feel like your contributions to this situation required cataloging." His voice was perfectly even. "They don't. What you noticed was useful, and what you did 3 days ago by telling me about Price was." He paused, choosing the word with visible care. "It changed the outcome of several things, including mine. I was protecting myself," she said honestly. "Or trying to, yes." He said it without contradiction. "And in doing so, you also protected me and everyone in this building. Those things are not mutually exclusive." He looked out at the lake for a moment. "In my experience, people who can hold more than one true thing at the same time are rare." Petra felt the warmth of the glass room, the quiet of it, the strange improbable safety of sitting across a table from a man who had, in 72 hours, dismantled the architecture of 3 years of her father's worst decision. She thought of all the mornings she'd cleaned this room before dawn, invisible, moving furniture back by millimeters, making everything exactly as she'd found it so no one would know she'd been there. She thought of how different it felt to be seen. "What did you mean?" she said slowly. "When you said it depends on what I want." Dominic looked back from the lake. There was something in his expression she didn't have a word for. Not softness, not calculation, but the particular quality of attention a person gives when they have decided that what is about to be said matters. "Your placement contract has run its original term," he said. "You're not obligated to remain in this household. If you want to return to Ottawa, return to nursing, resume the life that this situation interrupted, I will ensure you leave here with enough to make that possible without compromise." He held her gaze. "But I am also, if you choose to stay, in need of someone with a particular quality of attention and a demonstrated ability to notice things other people overlook." He paused. "Not as domestic staff." Petra was quiet for a long moment. "You're offering me a job. I'm telling you that the door is genuinely open in 2 directions," he said. "I am not a man who makes that offer strategically. I mean it both ways." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had not permitted herself to in 11 months, the way you don't look at people you're trying to remain invisible around. She saw the scars on his forearms and the steadiness in his face and the absolute absence of performance in his manner. And she thought about all the people in her life who had needed her to be small so that they could be comfortable, and how none of them had ever sat across a table from her in the dark and asked what she wanted. "I'll stay," she said. He nodded, not with surprise, not with relief, with the particular quality of a person receiving information they had hoped for, but were genuinely prepared to hear go the other way. Outside, Toronto's December lights held steady across the water, patient and indifferent and constant, the way the best cities are. Inside the solarium, the tea went cold on the table between them, and neither of them moved to deal with it, and the quiet was the kind that doesn't need filling. The woman who had spent 11 months making herself invisible had, without any particular moment of decision, stopped.